Section 4 of the Adventures of Johnny Chuck. This recording is in the public domain. The Adventures of Johnny Chuck by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 13. Polly and Johnny Chuck Go House Hunting. Johnny Chuck was happy. Yes, Sir, Johnny Chuck was happy. So happy that he felt like doing foolish things. You see, Johnny Chuck loved Polly Chuck, and he knew now that Polly Chuck loved him. He had known it ever since he had fought with the foolish little dog who had dared to frighten Polly Chuck. After the fight was over, and the little dog had been sent home ki-yi-yiing, Polly Chuck had crept out of the old stone wall where she had been hiding, and snuggled up beside Johnny Chuck and looked at him as if she thought him the most wonderful Chuck in all the world, as indeed she did. And Johnny had felt his heart swell and swell with happiness until it almost choked him. So now once more Johnny Chuck began to think of a new home. He had forgotten all about seeing the world. All he wanted now was a new house, built just so, with a front door and a hidden back door, and big enough for two, for no more would Johnny Chuck live alone. So, with shy little Polly Chuck by his side, he began to search for a place to make a new home. The more he thought about it, the more Johnny wanted to build his house over by the lone elm tree where he had first seen Polly Chuck. It was a splendid place. From it you could see a great way in every direction. It would be shady on hot summer days. It was near a great big patch of sweet clover. It seemed to Johnny Chuck that it was the best place on all the Green Meadows. He whispered as much to Polly Chuck. She turned up her nose. "It's too low," said she. "Oh," replied Johnny, and looked puzzled, for really it was one of the highest places on the Green Meadows. "Yes," said Polly in a brisk, decided way, "it's altogether too low. Probably it is wet." "Oh," said Johnny once more. Of course he knew that it wasn't wet, but if Polly didn't want to live there, he wouldn't say a word. Of course not. "Now there's a place right over there," continued Polly. "I think we'll build our house right there." Johnny opened his mouth to say something, but he closed it again without speaking and meekly trotted after Polly Chuck to the place she had picked out. It was in a little hollow. Johnny knew before he began to dig that the ground was damp, almost wet. But if Polly wanted to live there, she should, and Johnny began to dig. By and by he stopped to rest. Where was Polly? He looked this way and that way anxiously. Just as he was getting ready to go hunt for her, she came hurrying back. "I found a perfectly lovely place for our new home," she cried. Johnny looked ruefully at the hole he had worked so hard to dig. Then he brushed the dirt from his clothes and followed her. This time Johnny had no fault to find with the ground. It was high and dry. But Polly had chosen a spot close to a road that wound down across the Green Meadows. Johnny shook his head doubtfully, but he began to dig. This time, however, he kept one eye on Polly Chuck, and the minute he found that she was wandering off, he stopped digging and chuckled as he watched her. It wasn't long before back she came in great excitement. She had found a better place. So they wandered over the Green Meadows, Polly leading the way. Johnny had learned by this time to waste no time digging, and he had made up his mind to one thing. What do you think it was? It was this. He would follow Polly until she found a place to suit him, but when she did find such a place, she wouldn't have a chance to change her mind again. Chapter 14. A New Home at Last. Home, no matter where it be, or it be big or small, is just the one place in the world that dearest is of all. Johnny Chuck was thinking of this as he worked with might and main. It was a new house that he was building, but already he felt that it was home, and every time he thought of it he felt a queer little tugging at his heart. You see, while it was his home, it was Polly Chuck's home too, and that made it doubly dear to Johnny Chuck even before it was finished. And where do you think Johnny was building his new home? It was clear way over on the edge of Farmer Brown's old orchard. Yes, Sir, after all the fuss Johnny Chuck had made over any other Chuck living on the Green Meadows, and after driving the old gray Chuck back to the Old Pasture, Johnny Chuck had left the Green Meadows himself. It wasn't of his own accord that Johnny Chuck had left the Green Meadows. Oh, no, indeed. He loved them too well for that. But he loved Polly Chuck more, and although he had grumbled a little, he had followed her up to the Old Orchard, and now they were going to stay there. Sometimes Johnny shivered when he thought how near were Farmer Brown and Farmer Brown's boy and Bowser the Hound. He had never been so far from his old home on the Green Meadows before, and it was all very strange up here. It was very lovely, too. Besides, it was in this very old orchard that Polly Chuck had been born, and she knew every part of it. Johnny felt better when he found that out, so he set to work to build a home, and this time he meant business. Polly Chuck could change her mind as many times as she pleased. That was going to be their home, and that was where they were going to live. Now Johnny Chuck had grown wise in the ways of the world since he first ran away from the home where he was born. Twice since then he had built a new home, and now this would be better than either of the others. He paid no heed to Polly when she pouted because he did not dig where she wanted him to. He went from tree to tree, big old apple trees they were, and at the very last tree, way down in a corner near a tumbled-down stone wall, he found what he wanted. Two spreading roots gave him a chance to dig between them. Polly watched him get ready for work, and she pouted some more.
"It would be a lot nicer out in that grassy place and a lot easier to dig," said she.
Johnny Chuck smiled and made the dirt fly.
"It certainly would be easier to dig,"
said he when he stopped for breath.
"Easier for me, and easier for Bowser the Hound or for old Granny Fox, if either wanted to dig us out. Now these old roots are just far enough apart for us to go in and out. They make a beautiful doorway. But Bowser the Hound cannot get through if he tries, and he can't make our doorway any larger. Don't you see how safe it is?"
Polly Chuck had to own up that it was safer than a home in the open could possibly be, and Johnny went on digging. He made a long hall down to the snuggest of bedrooms, deep, deep down underground. Then he made a long back hall, and all the sand from this he carried out the front way. By and by he made a back door at the end of the back hall, and it opened right behind a big stone fallen from the old stone wall. You would never have guessed that there was a back door there. His new house was finished now, and Johnny Chuck and Polly Chuck sat on the doorstep and watched jolly, round, red Mr. Sun go to bed behind the Purple Hills, and were happy. Chapter 15 Sammy Jay Finds the New Home. Johnny Chuck was missed from his old home on the Green Meadows. If he had known how much he was missed, he certainly would have tried to go back for at least a call on his old neighbors. There had been great surprise when it had been discovered that Jimmy Skunk was living in Johnny's old house. And at first some of the little people were inclined to look at Jimmy a wee bit distrustfully when he told how Johnny Chuck had given away his house. When Johnny sent back word by the Merry Little Breezes that it was true, they believed Jimmy Skunk and forgot the unpleasant things that they had begun to hint at about him. But they one and all thought that Johnny Chuck must be crazy. Yes, sir, they thought that Johnny Chuck must be crazy. They were sure of it when the Merry Little Breezes brought word of how Johnny had started out to see the world. But everybody was so busy about their own affairs in the beautiful bright springtime that they couldn't spend much time wondering about Johnny Chuck. They missed him every time they passed his old house and then forgot him. That is, most of the little people did. Peter Rabbit didn't. Peter used to stop every day to gossip with Johnny Chuck and tell him all the news, and now that Johnny Chuck was no longer there, Peter missed him greatly. Jimmy Skunk was always asleep or off somewhere. Besides, he was such a traveler that he knew all the news almost as soon as Peter himself. The Merry Little Breezes told Peter that Johnny Chuck was still on the Green Meadows, hunting for a new home, so Peter made up his mind that just as soon as Johnny got settled, Peter would hunt him up and call. You see, he never dreamed that Johnny would leave the Green Meadows, and he thought that of course the Merry Little Breezes would tell him just where Johnny Chuck's new house was, whenever it was built. But there is where Peter made a mistake. The Merry Little Breezes are the friends of all the little meadow and forest people, but they wouldn't be very long if they told everything that they found out. Their merry tongues they guard full well, and things they shouldn't never tell, for long ago they learned the way to keep a secret night and day. And so when they found Johnny Chuck's new house in the corner of Farmer Brown's old orchard, they promised Johnny that they wouldn't tell anybody, and they didn't. So it was a long time before anyone else found out what had become of Johnny Chuck, for no one thought of looking in the corner of the old orchard. The Merry Little Breezes used to come every day and bring Johnny Chuck the news, and he and Polly Chuck would laugh and tickle as they thought of Peter Rabbit hunting and never finding them. Then one morning, as Johnny Chuck sat on his doorstep, half dozing in the sun with his heart filled with contentment, he had happened to look up straight into two sharp eyes peering down at him from among the leaves of the apple tree under which he had built his house. He knew those eyes. They were such sharp eyes that they were unpleasant. He didn't even have to look for the blue and white coat of the owner to know who had found his snug home. But he pretended to keep right on dozing, and pretty soon the owner of the eyes disappeared without making a sound.
"Oh, dear,"
sighed Johnny Chuck.
"Now the whole world will know where we live, for that was Sammy Jay."
Then his face brightened as he added,
"Anyway, he didn't see Polly Chuck, and he doesn't know anything about her, so I'll keep twice as sharp a watch as before."
Chapter 16 Sammy Jay Plans Mischief Mischief may not mean to be really truly bad, but somehow it seems to make other people sad. Does a mean unpleasant thing and tries to think it fun. Then at last it runs away when trouble has begun. Of all the little people who live in the Green Forest and on the Green Meadows, none is more mischievous than Sammy Jay. It seems sometimes as if there was more mischief under that pert little cap Sammy Jay wears than in the heads of all the other little meadow and forest people put together. When he isn't actually in mischief, Sammy Jay is planning mischief. You see, it has grown to be a habit with Sammy Jay. And habits, especially bad habits, have a way of growing and growing. Now Sammy Jay had no quarrel with Johnny Chuck. Oh my, no! He would have told you that he liked Johnny Chuck. Everybody likes Johnny Chuck. But as soon as Sammy Jay found Johnny Chuck's new house, he began to plan mischief. He didn't really want any harm to come to Johnny Chuck, but he wanted to make Johnny uncomfortable. That is Sammy Jay's idea of fun, seeing somebody else uncomfortable. So he slipped away to a thick hemlock tree in the Green Forest to try to think of some plan to tease Johnny Chuck and make him uncomfortable. Of course, he knew that Johnny had hidden his new house in the corner of Farmer Brown's old orchard because he wanted it to be a secret. He didn't know why Johnny wanted it a secret, and he didn't care. If Johnny wanted it a secret, it would be fun to tell everybody about it. As he sat wondering who he should tell first, he saw Reddy Fox trotting down the Lone Little Path.
"Hi, Reddy Fox!" he shouted.
Reddy looked up.
"Hello, Sammy Jay. What have you got on your mind this morning?"
said Reddy.
"Nothing much,"
replied Sammy Jay.
"What's the news?"
Reddy grinned.
"There isn't any news," said he. "I was just going to ask you the same thing."
It was Sammy Jay's turn to grin.
"Just as if I could tell you any news, Reddy Fox! Just as if I could tell you any news!"
he exclaimed.
"Why, everybody knows that you are so smart that you find out everything as soon as it happens."
Reddy Fox felt flattered. You know people who do a great deal of flattering themselves are often the very easiest to flatter if you know how. Reddy pretended to be very modest, but no one likes to be thought smart and important more than Reddy Fox does, and it pleased him greatly that Sammy Jay should think him so smart that no one could tell him any news. Sammy knew this perfectly well, and he chuckled to himself as he watched Reddy Fox pretending to be so modest.
"Have you called on Johnny Chuck at his new home yet?"
asked Sammy Jay in the most matter-of-fact way.
"No,"
replied Reddy,
"but I mean to soon."
He said this just as if he knew all about Johnny Chuck's new home, when all the time he hadn't the remotest idea in the world where it was. In fact, he had hunted and hunted for it, but hadn't found a trace of it, and all the time Sammy Jay knew that Reddy didn't know where it was. But Sammy didn't let on that he knew.
I just happened to be up in Farmer Brown's old orchard this morning, so I thought I'd pay Johnny Chuck a call,"
said Sammy, and chuckled as he saw Reddy's ears pick up.
"By the way, he thinks you don't know where he lives now."
"Huh!" said Reddy Fox. "As if Johnny Chuck could fool me! Well, I must be moving along. Good bye, Sammy Jay."
Reddy trotted off towards the Green Meadows, but the minute he was out of sight of Sammy Jay, he turned towards Farmer Brown's old orchard, just as Sammy Jay had known he would.
"I guess Johnny Chuck will have a visitor,"
chuckled Sammy Jay as he started to look for Jimmy Skunk. End of section 4.